Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are really digging into something fundamental about how we think.
Yeah, we're talking about things like confirmation bias, maybe the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon.
Exactly. And usually when you hear those terms, you immediately think, okay, flaws, problems in reasoning.
Right, intellectual quicksand, basically. Things to avoid. That's the traditional view, definitely.
It's been framed that way for centuries, hasn't it? Like these biases are just glitches, things that get in the way of seeing things clearly.
Absolutely. Detrimental obstacles to objective truth, leading to bad decisions, distorted worldviews, all that.
The sources we're looking at today, they paint a really different picture. It's quite counterintuitive.
It is. We've got computational models, agent-based simulations, some field studies, too.
And they're suggesting that these very mental shortcuts, these so-called flaws, might actually be advantageous.
Adaptive, even. Hardwired into us because they give us an edge in certain situations.
So not just handicaps, but maybe sophisticated survival tools. That's a big claim.
It is, and this deep dive is really about exploring that complex function, how we filter reality. We're moving past the simple bad habit idea.
To see if there's computational proof that sometimes being efficient is evolutionarily better than being perfectly accurate.
Exactly. The sources really make you think. Maybe bias is the price we pay, but also the benefit we get for just functioning in a world with, limited brain power and tons of information.
Okay, let's lay the groundwork then. We need clear definitions. Let's start with the big one. Confirmation bias, or CB.
Okay, CB. It's fundamentally about selective engagement. It's that tendency to look for and prefer information that backs up what you already think or believe.
But it's not passive.
Yeah.
Right? You mentioned selective engagement.
No, it's active. You actually pay more attention to stuff that supports your ideas. You remember it better.
And the flip side.
You tend to scrutinize contradictory evidence more harshly, or you ignore it, or just don't even notice it as much.
Like a mental filter saying, yep, keep that, and nope, discard that if it rocks the boat in your head.
Pretty much. And people have been noticing this for ages. Francis Bacon, back in the 17th century, pointed it out how understanding, once it settles on an idea, kind of forces everything else to fit.
And then you had Watson's experiments later.
Yeah, classic stuff. He gave people a rule, like 2, 4, 6, and asked them to figure out the underlying pattern.
And people just kept testing sequences that confirmed their initial guess, like 8, 10, 12.
Exactly. They didn't try sequences that would falsify their hypothesis, like 2, 4, 5 or 7, 5, 3, even though that would have been more informative. They were stuck on confirming.
And that unchecked tendency, that's where the danger lies. Nickerson warned about this, didn't he?
He did. He worried it turns data mining, genuinely looking for patterns, into data mining.
Meaning you just see the patterns you expect, whether they're really there or not.
Right. You're essentially projecting your mind onto the data.
Okay, so that's confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And you said it fuels the second concept, the frequency illusion.
Yeah, the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. That's the fun name for it.
That's the one where, you learn a new word, or maybe you buy a red car.
And suddenly red cars everywhere, or you hear that word constantly.
It feels like the frequency actually increased overnight.
That subjective feeling, that's the frequency illusion. And it comes from 2 cognitive steps working together.
Okay, what's step 1?
Selective attention. Your brain's been primed by noticing the thing, the word, the car, so it starts dedicating more resources to spotting it again. The new thing is suddenly salient.
And step 2?
That's confirmation bias kicking in. Once you've noticed it again, your bias makes you remember and register those instances really clearly.
While conveniently forgetting all the times you didn't see the red car or hear the word.
Exactly. So attention tunes the dial, confirmation bias locks onto that new channel, making it seem way more common than it is.
So what's fascinating here is we're setting up a deep dive into the very mechanisms we use to filter reality and determine if they're actually survival tools.
That's the core question. If CB is so bad for objective truth, like Nickerson and others argue, why is it everywhere? Why is it so ubiquitous in humans?
The answer, according to these sources, is evolution and efficiency.
Right. The evolutionary argument really leans on the need for quick decisions, especially when you don't have all the facts, uncertainty.
Like Tversky and Kahneman's work on heuristics.
Yeah.
Mental shortcuts that are fast, but sometimes lead to errors.
Exactly. Those biases might help focus on what seems representative or the context, giving you a good enough answer quickly, which is often better than a perfect answer that takes too long.
Makes sense. If you're debating the exact species of snake while it's coiling to strike, speed beats accuracy.
Definitely. But the adaptive argument gets even more interesting when you look at groups, not just individuals.
Okay. How does that work?
The sources talk about a cognitive division of labor.
Cognitive division of labor. Tell me more. How does my personal bias help the group?
Well, imagine a group trying to solve a tough problem, like designing something new or figuring out a scientific puzzle. If everyone was perfectly objective, they might all explore the same, most obvious paths.
Okay, maybe getting stuck together.
Potentially. But if the group has individuals who are each sort of biased towards different ideas or perspectives, even if some of those are initially wrong.
They spread out the search.
Exactly. They collectively explore a much wider range of possibilities. The group's search net is cast wider because the individual biases push people down different paths.
So individual bias, even if it makes me less accurate sometimes, helps the group explore more ground and potentially find a better solution through debate and, well, diverse viewpoints.
That's the idea. It reframes bias not just as a personal flaw, but maybe as fuel for group innovation.
Interesting. Okay, so to test the individual efficiency part, the researchers use these agent-based models, ABMs, computer simulations.
Right. They set up a scenario. It needed to be simple enough to model but capture that high-stakes trade-off. They called it the anaconda and berry problem.
Catchy name. Sets the scene well. Balancing danger and reward.
Precisely. You have these agents in a simulated world, and there are two types of signals they need to detect. Binary signals.
The signal A and signal B.
Signal A is the anaconda. Missing an anaconda is really bad news. High cost. In the model, it was like -10 fitness points if you miss it.
Catastrophic. And signal B.
That's the berries, resources. Missing them isn't great, but it's not fatal. Low cost, maybe -1 fitness point.
And spotting either one gives you a benefit.
Yeah, detecting either gives a positive fitness boost, but the environment is unbalanced because the cost of missing is so different.
Okay, so you've got this risky environment. How did they actually model the bias part?
This is key. The agents start out unbiased. They have a base detection rate for any signal. Let's call it gamma. Gamma, that's just their natural ability.
And then bias comes in.
Yes. Through a bias strength factor, let's call it beta. Beta, and here's the crucial mechanic. The very first event the agent detects determines its bias.
Wow, okay, so if it spots an anaconda first.
Boom. It becomes A-biased for the rest of its simulated life, essentially. If it spots berries first, it becomes B-biased.
And that bias actually changes how well it detects things. It's not just a label.
No, it directly modifies their detection probability. An A-biased agent takes its base rate, gamma, and adds the bias strength, beta, for detecting more A signals. So its chance becomes gamma plus beta.
Better at seeing what it expects.
Right. But, and this is the trade-off, its chance of detecting the other signal, the B signal, berries, goes down. It becomes gamma beta.
So it's literally modeling selective attention and maybe even memory effects.
Yeah.
You get better at seeing confirming evidence, worse at seeing disconfirming evidence.
Exactly. That formula is the computational heart of the bias simulation.
And they measured success using omega. That was the fitness score.
Yep. Omega represents overall performance, survivability, reproductive success in the simulation. Higher omega means better adapted.
So they ran these simulations maybe over many generations, letting agents evolve. What was the big, perhaps surprising takeaway?
The core finding was pretty stark, actually. In a wide range of simulated environments, the biased agents consistently performed better than the unbiased agents.
Wait, significantly better?
Yes, significantly. Their overall fitness, their omega score, was just higher.
So being prejudiced in the models world made you more successful. That feels deeply counterintuitive compared to how we value objectivity.
It does. It really challenges that assumption. The researchers explain it through sheer efficiency.
How so?
The confirmation bias essentially sensitizes the agent to one type of data, usually the more common or more critical type, based on that first encounter. This lets them detect more signals overall.
Even the ones they're biased against. How does that work?
Well, partly because they become very good at spotting the thing they are biased towards, maximizing those benefits or minimizing those high costs. But also, as we touched on with cognitive division of labor, if you imagine a population, having agents specialized in A and others in B might lead to more total detections for the group. The individual system adjusts its attention towards what seems most prevalent or important for it.
Increasing the total volume of relevant information processed, even if the perception of frequency is skewed.
Exactly, and they back this up statistically. They ran simulations where conditions fluctuated, costs and benefits changed randomly, base detection rates varied.
And the bias agent still came out on top.
Consistently and significantly. It wasn't just a weird edge case. The model showed it as a robust evolutionary advantage.
So the answer to should agents be biased
Mm-hmm.
in this model was surprisingly.
Yes. Overwhelmingly yes in most conditions tested. The performance gap was big enough to drive the evolution of strong bias, high beta values, over just 200 simulated generations.
Okay, but that whole mechanism seems to hang on a single moment, that power of the first impression.
It really does. The agent's entire future success, its fitness, seems heavily influenced by what it happens to encounter first.
Why is that first observation so critical in the model's logic?
It's statistical, really. In most environments, things aren't perfectly balanced. One type of signal is usually more common.
Right, like maybe berries are generally more frequent than anacondas.
Exactly. So statistically speaking, the first signal an agent detects is more likely to be the more common signal.
Ah, so the mechanism works because the first piece of data is often a reasonably good clue about the overall environment.
Precisely. If A signals make up 80% of events, the agent will probably see an A first, develop an A bias, and then become highly efficient at detecting the most common thing, which is generally beneficial.
It's like the brain takes this tiny initial sample, forms a quick hypothesis, and then commits to confirming it for efficiency's sake, a cognitive gamble that usually pays off.
And the simulation data, specifically figure 7 in the paper, showed this clearly. Biased agents hit peak performance when the more common signal was the first one they saw.
But what if they got unlucky? What if they saw the rare signal first?
Then they formed the wrong bias. They became biased towards the infrequent signal, which tanked their performance. They were focusing resources on the wrong target, essentially.
That has huge real-world implications, doesn't it? Especially for how we perceive people.
Absolutely. Think about meeting someone new. If you view their actions as a stream of signals, some confirming your initial good feeling, A, some maybe contradicting it, B.
That first impression, whether positive or negative, sets the bias.
And according to this model, that bias becomes stable, persistent. You might literally become less likely to detect future signals that contradict your initial assessment, just because your cognitive system has efficiently allocated its attention based on that first encounter.
It explains so much about why first impressions are notoriously hard to shake. Our brains might be wired to lock onto that initial data point and then use confirmation bias to maintain that view, purely for processing efficiency.
It's a powerful, potentially sobering thought about social judgment.
Okay, but the bias wasn't always helpful in the models, right? There had
Yeah.
to be limits. Where did this adaptive efficiency start to break down?
Definitely wasn't a universal win. There were clear scenarios where bias was either useless or actually harmful.
Like what?
The first was in what they called balanced worlds. Imagine an environment where A signals and B signals are almost equally common, say 50-50 frequency.
Okay, alpha is close to zero point 0.5 in their terms.
Right. And let's assume the costs and benefits of detecting A versus B are roughly equal too. In that situation, developing a bias towards A doesn't really help you because you lose out just as much by missing B.
Focusing on one offers no net advantage if the environment is perfectly balanced.
Exactly. And in those balanced simulations, the models showed that no significant bias evolved. The agents stayed relatively unbiased because there was simply no evolutionary pressure favoring selective perception.
So the environment needs to be skewed enough, either in frequency or in cost benefit, for the bias advantage to appear.
Correct. The second major limitation, and this one's really crucial, involved the agent's starting ability, its high base detection rate.
Ah, this is where it gets really interesting. Bias helps when signals are faint or hard to spot, but if you're already naturally good at detecting things.
Then adding a strong bias can actually hurt your overall performance. The math makes it clear.
Explain that trade-off again. Let's use the numbers. Say gamma is high, like 0.8, 80% base detection.
Okay, gamma until 0.8 less. Now let's add a strong bias, say beta is 0.3. What happens to the detection rate for the confirming signal?
That would be gamma plus beta, so 0.8 cents, plus 0.3 cold $1.11.
Right, but detection probability can't go above 1.0 or 100%, so you hit a ceiling. The actual gain is only 0.2 from 0.8 up to 1.0. You get very little improvement on the confirming side because you were already good.
Okay, diminishing returns there. But what about the disconfirming side? That's gamma beta.
Now you calculate $0.8, 0.3 over 0.95. You've just slashed your ability to detect the non-confirming signal from 80% down to 50%.
Ah, I see the asymmetry. The gain on the confirming side is capped, maybe even negligible if gamma's high enough, but the penalty on the disconfirming side is significant. You lose more than you gain.
Precisely. Strong bias doesn't help much when you're already competent, but it makes you significantly worse at noticing things that contradict your bias. You become effectively blind to alternatives.
So the evolutionary pressure would actually favor lower bias strengths in agents that already have high natural detection abilities.
And that's what the models showed. Agents evolved lower beta values when gamma has high. The value of strong CB diminishes and can even reverse if the signal is easy to perceive or if cognitive resources aren't the main limitation.
You can see that applying in the real world, right?
Yeah.
Like an expert doctor or analyst who has a very high gamma for spotting patterns in their field.
Exactly. Their expertise gives them a high base rate, but if they develop a very strong confirmation bias, maybe they become overly attached to a specific diagnosis or theory.
They might miss the subtle signs, the disconfirming evidence that contradicts their initial expert hunch, potentially leading to mistakes. High confidence plus strong bias can be a dangerous mix.
It's really striking how that core mechanism, the brain locking on to an initial observation or concept to guide attention, efficiently pops up in so many different areas.
Like the frequency illusion we defined earlier. It comes right back to that.
Yep, the dual mechanism. Selective attention gets triggered by something new or salient.
And then confirmation bias kicks in to remember all the subsequent times you notice it, reinforcing the feeling of increased frequency.
And we mentioned it relates to the recency illusion too, that feeling that something you just noticed must be a recent phenomenon, even if it's been around for ages.
Right. And this combination, this illusion, isn't always just a weird quirk. The sources show it can actually be useful, sometimes deliberately leveraged.
Yeah, there's some great professional case studies illustrating this.
Let's start with the person who coined the term frequency illusion, the linguist Arnold Zwicky. What was his observation?
Zwicky noticed it in his own field. Linguists would be studying some new or evolving language feature. His example was the use of all as a quotative, like, and then I was all, no way.
Okay.
Once they started focusing on it, their selective attention was heightened. They were primed.
And then confirmation bias.
Made them feel like they were hearing it constantly, everywhere in everyday conversation. Their subjective experience suggested this linguistic feature was exploding in use.
But when they actually look at the data, like transcribed conversations,
the objective frequency was much lower than they perceived. Their brains were just really good at noticing and remembering the instances they were looking for, creating that gap between subjective feeling and objective reality.
it perfectly mirrors the ABM outcome. The agent gets better at spotting the target signal, but its overall opinion of the world gets skewed.
Exactly. Now contrast that with a situation where this skewed perception is actually beneficial, like in medicine.
How does the frequency illusion help a doctor?
Think about medical trainees learning about rare diseases. These conditions are, by definition, infrequent and often hard to spot.
Okay.
When a trainee really studies a specific rare condition, maybe a particular type of, say, gastrointestinal lesion, their brain becomes highly sensitized to its signs and symptoms.
Their selective attention is dialed way up for that specific pattern.
Right. It's like they've temporarily developed a strong bias, increasing the salience of that rare signal.
Right.
Gamma plus beta is momentarily boosted for that specific rare thing.
And the result?
This focused attention can actually help them successfully identify a genuinely rare case in a patient that might otherwise have been missed by someone without that recent priming.
So here, the illusion, or rather the heightened sensitivity driven by attention and bias, directly leads to a positive outcome, potentially saving a life.
Absolutely. In a high-stakes field like medicine, the ability to recognize an unusual critical pattern, even if prompted by this mechanism, is incredibly valuable. The trade-off, temporary skewed perception for potential diagnostic breakthrough, seems clearly justified there.
We also see this impacting perceptions in economics, particularly around inflation.
Oh yeah, this is a classic example of the biased sample problem created by frequency perception. Studies show that people's perceived rate of overall inflation isn't usually based on the wide range of goods economists track.
What is it based on then?
It tends to be heavily biased towards the price changes of things they buy frequently.
Like milk, bread, gas.
Yeah.
Stuff you notice the price of regularly.
Exactly. The Swedish study you mentioned earlier is a great illustration. In Sweden, women traditionally did most of the household grocery shopping.
Okay, so they had high-frequency interaction with food prices.
Right. And during a period when food price inflation was running much higher than the general inflation rate across the whole economy.
They perceived overall inflation to be higher.
Significantly higher than men did on average. Their daily encounters with rising food prices dominated their perception, creating a biased sample of economic data in their minds.
It's the anaconda and berry problem, but with bread and TVs. Your brain focuses on the high-frequency or high-impact signals.
Perfectly put. And this brings us back around to the group benefit idea, the social theory of reasoning.
Right. The ABM suggested individual bias helps the group. How do the models show that?
Well, remember how confirmation bias works? It drives you to seek out evidence that supports your existing view. In the model, figure 6 specifically, the unbiased agents all ended up having very similar perceptions of the environment, clustering tightly around the true average signal frequency.
They were accurate, but homogeneous.
Exactly. But the biased agents, they were spread all over the map. Some, due to their initial encounter, perceived A signals as extremely common, while others perceived them as rare. Their opinions were much more diverse, more heterogeneous.
Even though many individual opinions were wrong or skewed compared to reality.
Yes, but that diversity is the key insight for the group level. Because each agent is biased, they are driven to find evidence supporting their particular skewed view. This leads the group, collectively, to explore a wider range of possibilities and gather more observations overall, even if those observations are filtered through individual biases.
So the theory suggests reasoning isn't primarily for finding objective truth for yourself.
But maybe more for finding arguments to persuade others within the group. Confirmation bias fuels this argumentative process, ensuring a broader, more robust exploration of the problem space by the collective, even if individual members hold biased views.
Okay, so the efficiency of bias relies on locking on to information, selective attention, memory. And memory is hugely impacted by repetition. This leads us straight into the illusory truth effect.
Right. This is a really robust finding in psychology. Simply repeating a piece of information makes people rate it as more likely to be true.
Even if it's completely false.
Yes. It works for trivia statements, advertising claims, political slogans, fake news headlines, rumors. You name it. Repeat it, and its perceived truthfulness tends to creep up.
And it's surprisingly resistant to things that should stop it, right? Like knowing the source is incredible.
Exactly. It happens over short time gaps, long time gaps. It even works, sometimes disturbingly, when the statement directly contradicts what people already know to be true, or when it's just flagrantly absurd.
Like the Earth is a perfect square example they sometimes use in studies. Repeating that can make it seem slightly more plausible.
It can get a measurable bump, yes. It's wild. The underlying mechanism seems to be processing fluency.
Meaning.
When you encounter information again, your brain processes it more easily, more quickly. It feels familiar, fluent.
Yeah, that feeling of ease gets misinterpreted.
The brain seems to use fluency as a heuristic, a shortcut for truth. In the real world, true things probably do get repeated more often than false things, generally speaking. So the brain takes the feeling of easy processing as a signal. Ah, this must be true.
It's usually a helpful shortcut that can be easily exploited.
Precisely.
Uh,
And the research you mentioned dug really deep into the dose of repetition needed. They went way beyond the usual 1 or 2 repetitions in labs.
yeah, testing statements repeated up to 27 times over a week. What did they find about how belief changes with that much repetition? Is it just a straight line upwards?
No, definitely not linear. The increase in perceived truth follows a logarithmic curve.
Logarithmic. Okay, so that means diminishing returns.
Exactly. Think about it neurologically. There's a phenomenon called repetition suppression. The more you're exposed to something, the less neural activity it triggers each time. The processing gets easier, but the increase in ease gets smaller with each repetition.
So where do they see the biggest impact? The biggest jump in belief?
Consistently, the research shows the largest, most statistically significant increase in perceived truth happens between the first and the second time someone encounters a statement.
Wow. Just going from seeing something once to seeing it twice provides the biggest boost.
Yes, that initial reinforcement seems to be the most powerful step. After that, the third, fourth, fifth repetitions add progressively less and less to the perceived truthfulness. Often, those later increases weren't even statistically significant.
That's a critical point. It suggests that maybe the huge effort spent on repeating a message 10, 20, 50 times might be hitting a wall pretty quickly in terms of changing belief.
It really does. The brain seems to quickly adjust its prediction error after that second encounter. The information feels familiar, fluent, and gets tagged as probably true relatively fast. The practical benefit of hammering it home 9, 10, or more times might be minimal compared to that initial 1 to 2 jump.
This obviously has massive high-stakes implications. Think about advertising.
Absolutely. That logarithmic curve essentially defines the wear-out effect advertisers worry about. There's a point where spending more money on repeating the ad just doesn't deliver a worthwhile increase in perceived quality or truthfulness. The research suggests that point might arrive sooner than many assume, maybe around 9 exposures or so.
And then there's the darker side, politics and misinformation.
Chillingly, yes. Repeated exposure to false or misleading claims demonstrably increases how true they feel, even if they're flagged as false by fact-checkers, or if they clash with someone's own political beliefs.
People still start to believe it just through sheer repetition.
The perceived truth rating inches up incrementally. That study tracking a political claim repeated 86 times showed exactly that repetition alone drove belief, overriding other factors.
And the sources connect this directly to public health, specifically during the COVID-19 pandemic.
They did. Research found that people who were repeatedly exposed to messages downplaying the severity of COVID-19, for example, constantly hearing it compared to the flu on certain media channels, came to believe those minimizing messages more strongly.
Even if official health guidance said otherwise.
Yes, and critically, higher viewership of channels broadcasting those repeated minimizing messages correlated with people engaging in fewer protective behaviors, like masking or distancing.
Which had real consequences.
Tragically, yes. That reduced protective behavior was then associated with higher rates of COVID-19 infections and deaths, particularly among older viewers who were heavily exposed to the repeated misinformation.
So repetition isn't just about making things memorable. It actively sculpts our perception of reality, our beliefs. And that adaptive mechanism based on fluency can be turned against us, sometimes with fatal results.
Okay, let's bring this down from, societal issues to something more individual, more everyday, perhaps, the workplace. There's a fascinating study that looked at how these bias mechanisms influence work happiness.
Using a specific model, right? The IOI model.
Yeah, inside out, outside in. The inside out part is about the employee's internal state, their personal resources. They measure this using psychological capital, or PSYCAP.
PSYCAP. That includes things like hope, optimism.
Hope, efficacy like belief in your ability to succeed, resilience, and optimism. Basically, a bundle of positive psychological states. That's the inside factor.
And the outside-in factor.
That's the employee's perception of the work environment, specifically the positive aspects of the organizational culture. They called these organizational virtues OV.
Like seeing integrity or trust or forgiveness in how the organization operates.
Exactly. So the researchers tracked school staff over 3 different time points, T1, T2, T3, to see how the internal state PSYCAP influenced the perception of the external environment.
Our fate. And they suspected our old friends, confirmation bias and selective exposure, were the mechanisms connecting the two.
That was the hypothesis. First, they looked at selective exposure.
How did they test that? What was the prediction?
The SE hypothesis was that employees, starting with higher PSYCAP, a more positive internal attitude at time 1, would, over time, come to rate the organizational culture more positively.
Because they'd be selectively noticing and focusing on the virtues that matched their positive outlook, filtering out the negatives.
That's the idea. They're selectively exposing themselves to the positive signals in the environment that confirm their internal state.
And did the results support that?
Yes, but with a really interesting time lag. High PSYCAP measured at the start, T1, did predict more positive ratings of the organizational virtues later on at T2 and T3.
Yet not immediately.
Crucially, no. There was no significant link between PSYCAP and OV when measured at the same time point, cross-sectionally at T1 or T2 or T3. The effect only showed up longitudinally over time.
So just feeling optimistic today doesn't instantly make you see the workplace through rose-tinted glasses today. It takes time for that selective filter to shape your perception.
Exactly. It suggests there might be a kind of tipping point or accumulation needed for selective exposure to really kick in and influence how you evaluate your surroundings. It's not an instant switch. It's a gradual process of filtering and attending that builds up.
Okay, so that's SE operating over the medium term. What about confirmation bias, CB? How do they test that in this workplace setting?
For CB, they used a different kind of measure, a projective one involving sentence completions. The idea was to see if people's current view of the culture biased how they completed neutral sentence stems.
So the CB hypothesis was, if you currently rate the organization's virtues highly, you'll provide more positive, confirming sentence completions.
Precisely. You'll complete sentences in a way that affirms your positive assessment.
And did that hypothesis hold up?
Yes, it did, but with the opposite timing pattern to SE. The link between positive OV ratings and positive sentence completions was significant cross-sectionally.
Meaning at the same point in time.
Right. How positively you rated the culture at T2 strongly correlated with how positively you completed sentences at T2. It confirmed your current belief.
But did T2 ratings predict T3 sentence completions? Did the confirmation effect persist over time?
No, it didn't. The positive view at T2 did not significantly predict providing positive completions later at T3.
Ah, so that's the key difference. SE builds up over time, shaping future perception.
Mm-hmm.
CB acts right now, confirming the current attitude, but it fades quickly.
That's exactly the implication. Confirmation bias, at least in this real-world setting, seems to operate more as a microprocess. It's driven by your attitude in the moment. It reinforces how you feel right now, but it needs ongoing fuel.
Which suggests for, say, managers trying to foster a positive environment.
It's not enough to just do one positive initiative and expect the CB effect to last. You need regular, ongoing efforts to maintain those positive attitudes because the confirmation bias mechanism seems to have a fairly short memory in this context. It needs that constant reinforcement.
Okay, so putting SE and CB together in this workplace context, what's the overall dynamic? How do they interact?
They potentially create this upward spiral, a dynamic positive cycle. Your positive internal state, PSYCAP, makes you gradually start noticing more of the good things in the culture, selective exposure over time.
Which then gets reinforced in the moment.
Right. Noticing those virtues confirms your positive outlook, confirmation bias now, which likely feeds back into maintaining or even boosting your PSYCAP and leads you to evaluate the whole environment more positively, ultimately contributing to greater work happiness.
So the employee is, in a way, actively co-constructing their positive experience by using these adaptive filtering mechanisms, SE shaping the long view, CB reinforcing the present moment. #outro. Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. What does this all mean? We started this deep dive looking at things like confirmation bias and the frequency illusion, which we usually think of as just bad thinking habits.
Right, flaws to be overcome.
But we've journeyed through computational models, evolutionary arguments, real-world studies, and the picture's much more complex. These biases might actually be adaptive tools.
Tools designed for efficiency, especially in environments that aren't perfectly balanced, where signals vary in frequency or importance. They help agents, and maybe us, maximize fitness, detect more signals overall.
And this efficiency seems rooted in two really powerful cognitive moves we discussed. First, that tendency to heavily weigh the first thing we observe, using it to set our cognitive filters.
Which usually works because the first signal is often representative, letting us quickly focus on what's likely common or critical.
And second, the surprising logarithmic power of repetition, where that jump from seeing something once to seeing it twice gives the biggest boost to perceived truth.
Driven by that feeling of processing fluency.
And we can't forget the group context, how individual confirmation bias, while maybe skewing personal views, can lead to more diverse opinions and broader exploration within a group, potentially aiding collective problem solving.
It really highlights that fundamental trade-off. Individual efficiency versus objective truth.
The models were clear. The biased agent often succeeds more in terms of fitness, gathering benefits, detecting signals.
But the sources constantly remind us of the cost. The agent always ends up with a biased sample of the world. You might thrive, but your opinion of reality, your understanding, is inherently skewed. You're hindered in the pursuit of objective accuracy.
That tension between being efficient enough to survive and accurate enough to understand reality, that feels like a core human challenge.
It really does. So if we connect this back to you, the listener, maybe the provocative thought to leave you with is this.
Okay.
The model suggests your brain, in many ways, might be designed to latch onto that first encounter with an idea or observation, using it to stabilize your reality and guide your attention efficiently. And we know your perception of truth gets its biggest single boost after just the second encounter with information.
Right, that logarithmic jump.
So the question is, what small, seemingly minor things, ideas, concepts, maybe even quick impressions of people or situations have you encountered just twice recently? And how might those now be disproportionately shaping your confidence in your view of the world just because of that powerful 1 to 2 cognitive leap? It's worth reflecting on what might be quietly anchoring your reality.